Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Utica. I'm Brandon Drew, a member of the Board of Trustees. Whether you are visiting for the first time or have been a member for many years, you are welcome here. Whatever faiths you have known, if any, you are welcome here. Whoever you are and whomever you love, you are welcome here. We are invited to bring our whole selves to this worship service, our doubts as well as our convictions, the pain and joy we have known, our longing for connection and understanding. Every part of you is welcome here. If you're signing in today for the first time, we are glad you have joined us and hope you will stay for informal conversation and breakout groups after the service. Let us open our hearts and minds to the experience of community and the wisdom of love.
About rainbows, what's on the other side? Rainbows are visions, but only illusions. Rainbows have nothing to hide. So we've been told, and some choose to believe it. I know they're wrong, wait and see. Someday we'll find it, the rainbow connection, the lovers, the dreamers, and me. wished on the morning star. Somebody thought of that, and someone believed it. Look what it's done so far. What's so amazing that keeps us stargazing? What do we think we might see? Someday we'll find it, the rainbow connection, the lovers, the dreamers, and me. All of us under its spell, we know that it's probably magic. Have you been half asleep? Have you heard voices? I've heard them calling my name. Is this the sweet sound that calls the young sailors? The voice might be one and the same. I've heard it too many times to ignore it. Something that I'm supposed to be. Someday we'll find it, the rainbow connection, the lovers, the dreamers, and me. La 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 la.
Good morning. I'm the Reverend Erin Dajka Holley, the minister of this church. Our call to worship is written by Jason Cook. We seekers are on a quest to discover truth and meaning. Sometimes we think we've found it, wrapped up, glimmering with newness, straight off the intellectual assembly line, all of the answers right here for us and others, if they'd only listen. But truth has a way of coming in disguise, sometimes wearing rags and sometimes finery, but so often cloaked from our immediate sight. And sometimes that which we have rejected, that which we have let go of or decided was only for others, but not us, can be our teacher. Let our time of worship be an acknowledgement of the never-ending journey toward truth and meaning, and our appreciation of those we learn from along the way. Please join in singing our first hymn this morning, We Laugh, We Cry.
We laugh, we cry, we live, we die, we dance, we sing our song. We need to feel there's something here to which we can belong. We need to soul with pain and grief. But as we live, so shall we die. And when our lives are done, the memories we shared with friends, they will linger on and on. And we believe in life and in the strength of love. And we have found a place to be together. We have the right to grow. We have the gift to believe that peace within our living is an answer. We seek elusive answers to the questions of this life. We seek to put an end to all the waste of human strife. We search for truth, equality, and blessed peace of mind. And then we come together here to make sense of what we find. And we believe in life and in the strength of love. And we have found our joy being together. And in our search for peace, maybe we'll finally see, even to question truly is an answer.
Our chalice lighting words are by Beatrice Hitchcock. The flaming chalice is the symbol of Unitarian Universalism. It is an everlasting flame for this community. It offers its warmth to those who are cold. It provides light to those who would see. It purifies and transforms this into sacred space, this congregation into sacred community. May its flame burn true and high and strong. And Stephanie has for us a story.
Over 200 years ago, in a small house in a small town on the edge of a forest of very big trees in the state of New Hampshire, there lived a small boy. His name was Hosea Ballou. Hosea, just like other children, liked to learn and do new things. He was always asking questions about what and why and how. And just like the other children, Hosea liked to play. He liked to play hide and seek with his 9 older brothers and sisters. He liked to play word games inside when it was rainy, and he liked to play tag outside when it was sunny. In the winter, he liked to jump into snowdrifts. In the summer, he liked to jump into the creek. In the fall, he liked to jump into leaf piles. And in the spring, why, spring was Hosea's favorite season of all, because in the spring it would rain and rain and rain, and then Hosea could jump into mud. Hosea, just like other children, loved mud. He liked it when it was soft and squishy, and he liked it when it was thick and sticky. If it didn't rain quite enough, that wasn't a problem. Hosea would carry water to the dirt and create glorious mud puddles all of his own. He liked to poke sticks into puddles and see how deep the mud was. He liked to make mud pies and build mud dams. He liked to jump in puddles hard with both feet and make the muddy water splash really high so that the mud spattered all over his brothers and sisters' clothes. And he loved to step in puddles very slowly so that the mud oozed up just a little bit at a time between his toes. Yes, Hosea loved mud. Now, you can imagine that not everybody in his family liked mud quite as much as Hosea did. His mother had died when he was not quite 2, so his older sisters took care of him. His sister, who did laundry and scrubbed the family's dirty clothes in big wash tubs, did not like having to scrub all that mud off Hosea's clothes, or off anybody else's clothes either, after Hosea had stomped in a mud puddle extra hard. His other older sister, who kept the little children clean, didn't like having to scrub all that mud off Hosea. And Hosea, just like other children, didn't like having baths either, especially when it meant he had to stand in a wash tub in front of the fire and have water dumped over his head. But his sisters loved him, so they took him home and washed him and dried him and made him clean. Then Hosea's sisters went to their father and said, "Father, please tell Hosea to stop playing in the mud."
"Hosea,"
said his father very sternly.
"you should not play in the mud."
"Why?" asked Hosea, because, just like other children, asking questions was another thing he loved to do.
"Because,"
said his father, who was one of the preachers in the Baptist church the family went to.
"just as we try to live a good life, to be kind to other people, and to follow God's plan, we try to stay clean."
"Yes, Father," Hosea said, and after that day, he did indeed try to stay clean. But it wasn't easy. He stopped stomping in mud puddles on purpose and splashing the muddy water everywhere, and he stopped making enormous mud pies, but sometimes the mud was just there. Then he had to walk through the mud to get across the yard to gather the eggs from the chickens. He had to walk in the mud to feed the pigs, and sometimes when he was already muddy from doing his chores, he played in the mud, just a little bit, and got even muddier. His sisters, who loved him, took him home and washed him and dried him and made him all clean. But Hosea's sisters went to their father again and said, "Father, please tell Hosea to stop playing in the mud."
"Hosea,"
said his father even more sternly.
"you must not play in the mud."
"Yes, Father," Hosea said. He was sad, because he had truly tried not to get muddy, most of the time anyway. "Are you really angry with me, Father?"
"I am disappointed in you, Hosea, and I am a little angry with you."
Hosea hung his head and kicked at the dirt with his toes. Then he dared to look up, just a little, to ask, "Do you still love me?"
"Hosea,"
said his father, and his father didn't sound stern anymore.
"I will always love you, Hosea, no matter what you do."
Even if I get muddy again?
"Yes."
Even if I get really muddy?
"Yes."
Even if I get mud up to my eyebrows? And between my fingers and my toes? And in my hair?"
"Even then."
His father said with a smile. Then he added, very stern again,
"But remember, Hosea, you must try to stay clean."
"I'll remember and I'll try."
Hosea promised, and he did. He stayed clean, most of the time anyway. And as he grew up, he stopped liking mud quite so much, but he still liked to ask questions about what and how and why. "Father," Hosea asked when he was a teenager, "how can it be that our church believes that God will let only 1 in 1,000 people into heaven, even if many of those 1,000 people lead good lives?" His father didn't have an answer for that question. "Father," Hosea asked, "if I had the power to create a living creature, and if I knew that creature would have a miserable life, would suffer and die, and then go to hell and be miserable forever, and I went ahead and created it anyway, would that be a good thing or a bad thing? And would I be good or bad?" His father didn't have an answer for that question either. Hosea had to find his own answers. So he read the Bible, a book with many stories about religious people and about God. He went to some Universalist churches and asked more questions there. At the age of 19, Hosea decided that he believed in universal salvation, which is the idea that everyone, everywhere, everyone in the universe, would be given salvation. Eventually, everyone will be saved from hell. And not only did Hosea believe that God would let more than 1,000 people into heaven, Hosea Ballou believed God would eventually let everyone into heaven, good and bad.
How can you believe that?
Asked his father.
How can you believe that God would let bad people into heaven?
Because, Father, I remember what you told me when I was small. I believe that even if God is disappointed with people or a little angry with them, God will always love them and want them to be happy, no matter what they do and no matter how muddy they are.
Times are challenging for all of us, and in so many ways. Stuck mostly in our homes, separated from one another, from family, from friends. Employment may be uncertain. The wider economy definitely is uncertain, and every day we face a nation and world that is changing so rapidly, with destruction, despair, and more questions than answers. Times are challenging. And we ask for your generosity to this, our church. We thank you for having pledged and for keeping up with your payments. We thank you for your volunteer and leadership efforts, and we thank you for any additional contributions you may want to give to support the work of our church. Please mail a check to the church with plate in the memo line or contribute online. Now we will practice community candles, which is the opportunity for the congregation to be with one another as we mark notable things happening in our lives. If you would like to light a candle where you are, please do so, and in frame if you would like. If you would like to briefly share about a significant event in your life and have me light a candle, please unmute yourself or type into the chat. You could also privately message me in the chat, and I'll light a candle in silence for you. As always, I light one final candle for everything that has remained unspoken, for the things in our hearts, for the people that we love, for the people who need our thoughts and our prayers who we've never met. All of human experience is sacred. We are all connected to one another in ways deeper than we can imagine. And so we uplift and remember and send our prayers for all of these things. Amen. This morning's meditation is from Robert Weston, and before I begin reading it, I would like to invite you to connect with the surface that you're sitting or standing on. If your feet can touch the floor, feel the ground beneath you, the chair that may be supporting you, to know that you are connected to the world through our bodies, through breath. Acknowledge your breath. Thank it for keeping you alive. These words are from Robert Weston. I will lift up my voice and sing, whatever may befall me. I will still follow the light which kindles song. I will listen to the music arising out of grief and joy alike. I will not deny my voice to the song. For in the depth of winter, song, like a bud peeping through the dry crust of earth, brings back memory and creates anew the hope and anticipation of spring. Out of a world that seems barren of hope, song decries beauty in the shapes of the trees, lifts our eyes to distant mountain peaks, which, even if we see them not, remind us that they are there, waiting, and still calling us to come up higher. Out of the destruction of dear hopes, out of the agony of heartbreak, song rises once more to whisper to us that even this is but the stage setting for a new beginning, and that we shall yet take the pieces of our hearts and put them together in a pattern of deeper, truer lights and shades. I will lift up my voice in song, for in singing I myself am renewed, and the darkness of night is touched by the promise of a new dawn, for light shall come again.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea, move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Today's reading is by Hosea Ballou from A Treatise on Atonement. I am traveling through a large and extensive wood, and many miles from any inhabitants. I find 10 persons who are lost. They have been out of provisions for several days, and having fatigued themselves in wandering from hill to hill, stream to stream, striving to the utmost of their abilities to find inhabitants, having given up all hopes of ever seeing their homes again, and having in their minds bid their wives and children a long farewell, they are waiting for hunger to do its last work. The moment I discover myself to them with large supplies of wholesome and rich provisions, eerie eye glistens with unexpected joy. The current of life starts afresh in their veins, and they all advance to meet me on their enfeebled hands and knees, with eagerness to receive the staff of life. I hasten to improve the opportunity of showing my sovereignty and goodness. I feed 5 of them to the full, the other 5 I neglect. They beg for the smallest crust, which I do not want, but to no effect. Those whom I feed solicit me, every mouthful they eat, to bestow some on their fellow sufferers, but I refuse. I tell them, however, not to construe my conduct into partiality, but to learn my power and sovereignty by it. The 5 whom I have fed I assist out of the wood, and leave the rest to their wants. My conduct in the above affair appears so much blacker than my paper is white. I choose rather to leave the reader to make his comments than to write my own.
I hope that in hearing this first reading, you figured out that Hosea Ballou is poking holes in Calvinism, the belief that God has elected only a select few of all human beings to be saved, and selected them before they were even conceived. You see, Calvinism was all the rage in the colonies and in the early United States. Note that the period that I'm talking about right now is roughly the same time period as Hamilton the musical. And nearly everyone who had settled in New England had roots in some version of Calvinism. The Puritans, the Baptists, the guys behind the Great Awakening, all of them in some way Calvinist. Predestination, salvation of a select few. So when the early American Universalists, like Hosea Ballou, came to understand that God's love must extend to all people, it was in essential conflict with the Calvinism that everyone already knew. And his writing shows it. He's making arguments about why Calvinism couldn't possibly make sense in our knowledge of God's love. And he's also trying to make rational arguments. The other big theological movement happening in America at the same time was deism. The theology of Thomas Paine and Jefferson. Yes, Unitarians try to claim Jefferson, but he never claimed us. He was, however, a deist. And Unitarians, they were highly influenced by deism too, which is where all that confusion happens, because it's the Enlightenment. It's the rise of the age of reason. And it was essential, this reason, in the formulation of Hosea Ballou's Universalist theology. Right, Hosea Ballou. Here I go talking about him, making you listen to his words and his stilted language, and I haven't even introduced him. There's a slide with a picture. Does Carol have that for me? Maybe? Carol? There we go. There's Hosea Ballou. There he is. He was born 5 years before the Declaration of Independence and died 9 years before the Civil War. Thank you so much, Carol, for getting that slide up there in the middle of this. And as Stephanie told us during Together Time, Hosea was born in New Hampshire. His dad was a Baptist minister. And remember, baptism at that time generally Calvinist, so of course his dad didn't understand how he could have possibly become a Universalist. Ballou was 17 years old when he found Universalism. And it wasn't long after that he started traveling New England, preaching universal salvation. He was never trained in theology. He didn't even go to college. And yet, as a layperson, his preaching was well known. Enough so that in 1794, a mere 5 years after his conversion, the renowned Universalist evangelist, Reverend Elenon Winchester, suddenly stopped preaching in the middle of his sermon to the Convention of Universalists, thrust a Bible into Hosea Ballou's chest, and charged him to ordained ministry. What a crazy moment. You're sitting there listening to a renowned preacher, and suddenly he just gets up and is like, "Oh, you, Hosea, yeah, you're ordained now." Hosea Ballou was 23 years old. He served several small churches in Massachusetts, Vermont, and New Hampshire during the first 23 years of his ministry. And then he was called to the Second Universalist Church of Boston. And that was a big deal because John Murray, the first major Universalist preacher in America, he had been the minister of the First Universalist Church in Boston. And Hosea ended up at the second. Hosea's ministry there continued until his death. Now, while Hosea's preaching and ministry to congregations were truly important, the reason we remember Hosea Ballou is for his theological writings. He's hailed a father of American Universalism because of the books that he published, that he so carefully set forth his Universalist theologies. The reading that Glenn shared with us this morning was from a treatise on atonement, which he wrote at the age of 34 in 1805. That book has been through 16 editions, and you can still buy it from Amazon because scholars have deemed it culturally important. And so essentially you can buy a photocopy of a previous edition. He also wrote Examination of the Doctrine of a Future Retribution in 1834, so much later. We're talking 30 years after his treatise on atonement. And this is very formative to Universalism because in it, he argues that salvation is offered to everyone upon death, without any period of atonement or punishment or any kind of like mini hell or purgatory because of God's love. There were a number of Universalists at the time who thought, you know, if somebody was really sinful during their life, they would need to become reconciled to God after they died, to somehow make it right with God, and then to be given the opportunity for salvation. So it was universal salvation with the acknowledgement that, you know, maybe people need to get right with themselves. So that was some serious differences. And in the 1830s, there was almost a schism in Universalism between those who thought that you got to have a little bit of time of divine retribution before you can be saved. Even though you know you're going to be saved, you got to make up for it. And where Hosea Ballou and a few others were coming from and saying, nope, you die, you're saved. It doesn't matter. God loves you for being who you are as a human. You're saved when you die. Now, of course, I didn't set out to give you a history lesson this morning. Not really. What I want instead is to uplift a particular piece of Ballou's work, one that for me continues to feel so relevant. If we assert that God is love, and that a loving God would never leave humanity in desperate misery forever, that all souls are reconciled with God through eternal salvation, the question sits out there so plainly. Then why wouldn't everyone live a life of terrible sin? I mean, this is the question. This was the big question Hosea Ballou was having to constantly wrestle, because of that Calvinism that everyone knew. The Calvinism that said only certain people are saved and you'd better be living a good life to demonstrate to everybody else that you're one of the elect. That the only reason people would ever live well and good to one another is because they're afraid of damnation and hell after they die. So without divine reward or retribution in the next life, why is there a reason to be a good person? And Ballou spent a lot of time thinking and writing about this. And the conclusion he found is that people respond to immediate reward. We know this. People, just like the animals in the zoo who have been clicker trained with positive reinforcement, will do what makes them feel good. People do what makes them happy. Traditional Christianity, with the promise of reward or punishment in the distant future after death, says Ballou, does nothing to truly encourage a good life. He recognizes the inherent happiness witnessed in those who do the right thing, living well, loving widely, and caring for others. He could see that living well and caring for others is a reward in of itself. Now, anticipating an argument that this is a reason for doing good is simply out of self-interest, not religiosity, Ballou writes, "A man who acts for his own happiness, if he seek it in the heavenly system of universal benevolence, knowing that his happiness is connected with the happiness of his fellow men, people, which induces them, to do justly and to deal mercifully with all men, he is no more selfish than he ought to be." Again, we're talking the 1830s, so I apologize for the highly gendered language. He was using highly gendered language. But for Ballou, the impulse to be good to everyone else, recognizing that doing so creates happiness for the self, is also one of deep religious meaning. Being a good person is happiness unto itself, free of potential afterlife reward. It is recognizing the goodness that surrounds you, the sun that shines, the plants that grow, the hummingbird that comes to your hummingbird feeder, the blessings of life, and sharing the love that you receive well beyond yourself. With this comes joy, even a holy joy, a joy that mirrors the divine's joy in loving creation when we love one another. I have for you a second reading. It's titled "We Find Our Salvation Here" by Deanna Van Diver. Throughout time, our Unitarian Universalist faith tradition has held a thread of clarity. How we relate to each other creates the conditions of hell or heaven here on earth. We may not know or agree about what lies beyond this life, but it's our conviction that our actions and our inactions have consequences for the web of all existence. While fascinating and mysterious, we do not place our hopes for salvation here on earth, or salvation in what happens after death. We find our salvation here on earth, showing up for each other with mercy, respect, and compassion. How are we relating to our neighbors, friends? As a people of faith, we are called to a love that is bold, to love beyond our skill and through our fear with courage and compassion. As a faithful collective, we are called to offer sanctuary, refuge, and comfort to everyone afflicted by the systems of oppression in this world. As faithful individuals, we are called to relationships of care and accountability. It makes a difference in the quality of this world when people with access to privilege and power give voice to a vision of collective liberation and name the obstacles within and without that limit us. Can we choose to live courageously, a people of faith, a people so bold? Can we faithfully change people in the world and the sins of society that have become internalized within our beings? Our faith does not require that we be unafraid, only that we do not lead with fear or make our decisions from a place of fear. Our presence matters. How we relate to each other creates the conditions of hell or heaven here on earth. May we remember and affirm that we are all in this together, friends. We are all in this together. A few years ago, a friend of mine was driving with her husband to a theater in Minneapolis where they were meeting friends to practice acrobalance, a circus skill. It was a Sunday morning, and the light on the street turned green to continue through the intersection at Blaisdell Avenue, a partially residential one-way street south of downtown. I don't think that Gaia saw the two cars traveling at more than 50 miles per hour down Blaisdell. The light for her was green. Why would she need to check? The impact pushed their car up onto the sidewalk on the other side of the intersection. Gaia suffered a concussion, multiple broken ribs, and internal bleeding. Jason, her husband, also a beloved friend of ours, he died instantly. It was his 32nd birthday. My spouse, Neil, was at the theater with another friend, wondering why Gaia and Jason hadn't shown up. It took time for the police to track down the drivers of the two cars that had caused the accident, as they had run from the scene. But they were found, and we learned that the woman driver of the car that caused Jason's death had gotten into a heated altercation with a man that she knew at a nearby gas station. She had gotten into her car with friends to escape him, and he had pursued in his car with his friends. She drove recklessly while he chased after her just as recklessly. Their fight had been taken to the streets at high speeds, and Jason died, and Gaia was badly hurt. Gaia was raised a Unitarian Universalist, although we met her through circus and not church, although I met her father through church. So it should not surprise you that as the cases against both of the drivers of the cars made their way through the courts, she kept asking the victim's advocate and the prosecutor to incorporate restorative justice practices. Restorative justice. Now, its history is usually traced through the practices of some American indigenous tribes. The principle is that true justice isn't about punishment. It is instead about the damage done to relationship, to the community. And restorative justice seeks the restoration of relationship and a reconnecting to the community while addressing that wrongs were done. As it turns out, I see a lot of universalism, a lot of Hosea Ballou in restorative justice. And most people in our country would be really confused by this idea of achieving justice by having a sit down with everyone involved in the harm. The person who caused the harm, those who were harmed, the leaders in the community, friends and family of everyone involved, everybody sitting in a circle, all of these people, each one sharing about how what happened affected them. Each person listening deeply to the others, acknowledging how harm happened and seeking to find resolution and relationship. And this process may very well lead to real consequences for those who caused harm. But those consequences are determined by the needs of those who were harmed, because it's about relationship. It's about the reality that harm caused to one person is harm caused to the entire community, that the breakdown of relationship affects everyone, that the deep listening and understanding is what allows hearts and actions to shift. And Hosea Ballou wrote about how we are called to doing good by the knowledge of immediate reward through love of community. And I wonder if the reverse could also be true, whether we may avoid harming one another because we do not want to damage relationships, because of the immediate consequence of how it feels to hurt someone, to witness their pain. Gaya's request to the court to pursue restorative justice with the people who caused Jason's death was denied. It fit outside of the practices and the programs that were available. And she had no recourse but to go along with the standard methods of justice in our country. Trials. She wrote and read aloud to the court a victim statement. And that was the only communication that she was allowed with the woman whose reckless behavior killed Jason. And it was shared with the court while the perpetrator was in the room, but not in direct communication with her. And it was heartbreaking to sit in the courtroom, to hear Gaya speak, and to see no remorse on the defendant's face. Everything in her body language, everything that we learned from the prosecutors indicated that she accepted no culpability, that Jason died. She believed herself wholly in the right, simply doing what she had to do to escape the person with whom she was in conflict. And the court sent her to prison for a time, slapped her with fines. But I anticipate that she received this only with anger in her heart that this terrible thing was done to her, that she served time having done nothing wrong. But Jason, a good, loving, joyful man seeking to better himself and serve his community in so many ways, Jason's still dead. Gaya wanted nothing more than to be able to have a conversation with the woman who drove the car that killed him, to share with her stories about Jason, to maybe allow this driver to see that there were very real consequences in many people's lives from the action of driving recklessly. For Gaya, it was about trying to form a connection with this young woman, to connect her with the education and opportunities to serve the community, to right the wrong, and to understand that we are all connected. Gaya had hoped that the woman might have felt in her heart the fear, dismay, sadness, grief, and anger caused by her actions, to find justice through relationship. We are a faith that upholds relationship as the greatest thing of all. The love that binds us in our faith, one to another and to everything and everyone around us. We acknowledge that what we do matters. Like Ballou, we understand the immediate rewards of doing the right thing. And when we are in relationship, we are discouraged from taking actions that might harm another. Because it takes courage, though, to live in relationship. It takes effort to listen deeply, to open your heart to another's experience and pain, especially when you know that you may have caused harm. Most difficult of all is acknowledging through the learnings of these relationships that maybe you need to change your heart, your mind, and your actions to right the hurt, to restore the relationship. As Unitarian Universalists, we believe that it is important to risk this, that we are indeed connected to one another on the deepest of levels, that the reward for living a good life is the good life itself. Because all that holy is love. Because love in all things, even the hardest of things, is the only way to be whole. Together. Amen. Please join in singing our closing hymn, number 318, We Would Be One. Please join in reading our words. Please join in reading our words for extinguishing the chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we meet again. Words of benediction from Hosea Ballou. If we agree in love, there is no disagreement that can do us any injury. But if we do not, no other agreement can do us any good. Let us endeavor to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bonds of peace. Be well, go in peace, and amen.
Sweet love, it's the only thing that there's just too little of. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. No, just not for some, but for everyone. Lord, we don't need another mountain. There are mountains and hillsides enough to climb. There are oceans and rivers enough to cross, enough to last till the end of time. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. No, just not for some, but for fields enough to grow. There are sunbeams and moonbeams enough to shine. Oh, listen, Lord, if you want to know what the world needs now is love, sweet love. No, just not for some.